Hello and welcome to Talking Till Dawn. I'm Martin and I'm joined by the unforgettable Michael, what's his name?
Whitehouse. Hello everyone.
How's things with you?
Things are fine, a lot better now, as we briefly spoke about, trials and tribulations and all that, but we're back here at the cabin yet again for another Talking Till Dawn.
Michael is suffering from constipation, just to give you all a little bit of context there.
It would be great if there was actually a medication for constipation called trials and tribulations. It's a guy with a red face in the front of it.
Michael's been doing something else till dawn, but we're not going to go there.
Straining till dawn.
Well, I've been back at work, but apart from that, everything's fine. I saw a man get knocked off his bike today, Michael.
What is it with you? Recently you've had all sorts of things happening. It seems to involve people on bikes.
So, like, I mean, he was fine, but the car zoomed off, so he didn't get run over, as you might imagine. I think he just got bumped slightly and then kind of gradually lost his balance. It was one of those ones where it seems like they're falling for about 15 minutes.
The wobble.
Whoa. Yeah. And I don't know if the driver even noticed. I think he was over the horizon by the time the guy actually hit the pavement. But it was one of those awkward things where it was left with just me and him. And he's like lying on the tarmac groaning in pain, and I'm not laughing, but I'm waiting to cross the street, and he's obviously really embarrassed. I mean, I think he would have rather I wasn't there to see it, you know, and I offered to help the guy, like, are you alright? Do you need any help? No! Alright, are you injured? No! I'm like, well, maybe get up off your arse, because there's about 500 cars waiting to pass you. Anyway, I think he was fine. He limped away.
Poor guy. I was on a bike today.
I hear you've been at the cycling.
Yeah, Callum from Ghastly Tales has been. Well, he gave me a bike. It was a bit rusted and needed some work, but it's been a little restoration project for me. But
did he find it in a bin?
Yeah, he actually found it in the basement of the flats that he lives in, and there were 30 bikes there.
Wow. And
they had been sitting there for years. And Callum spoke to the concierge of the building that he works in and said to him, like, what are all these, bikes on shortage at the moment because of lockdown? A lot of people have been looking for them. And he said to the guy, some of these have been here for years and years. I don't even think some of these people live here anymore. So the concierge went round and spoke to everybody, and some people came and got their bikes.
Yeah.
But then there was a bunch that were left, and I got one of them. Anyway, nice. I was on my bike today, and I'm zooming around Uddingston like Peter Cushing. But Callum adjusted my saddle so high that when I try to get on my bike, I realise how inflexible I am. No, it's the correct height for me, but I realise I have to slant the bike to even get on it. But I'm slowly building.
Yeah, it'll be good for your agility.
Yeah, but my glasses slip off my face.
Mike, I'm going to ask you a question that's nothing to do with bikes. I don't have a good segue from bikes to this. Do you ever listen to the radio anymore?
Yes, occasionally.
The actual analogue radio?
The radio. Yeah, it probably has been a few years since it's been the analogue radio. I mean, I suppose in the car, but I think that's...
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the only place I would listen to as well. And it's almost slipped away without us noticing it. It inhabits kind of a funny position in the world of the media nowadays, at least here in the UK. I'm not sure about elsewhere. I mean, it's still going strong as an industry, but I think it struggles now against the likes of Spotify, YouTube, podcasting.
Yeah.
I'm sure most of us do still have access to an analogue radio, as you say, maybe in the car, maybe an old radio in the kitchen or something. And certainly a great deal of our modern technologies like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, mobile phone networks and digital broadcasting use radio for communication, albeit in a digitally encoded form. But that kind of direct access to that RF spectrum that you get with an old analogue radio or an old TV set, it's something that plays like a smaller and smaller role in people's lives, it seems. Analog TV's gone. It's rare that most folk, I think, even see or hear static these days. Remember static?
Oh, static's an amazing thing.
We hated it at the time, but we miss it now.
It's beautiful. That quote could sum up the 80s for me. Hated it at the time. Now I miss it. Now I absolutely miss it.
20th century kids like sitting up late, listening through the ghostly whispers and screeches of the universe to tune into some distant, forbidden pirate music station. I mean, that's like a lost experience today. And that extends to whole radio bands. Shortwave radio, or HF as it's sometimes called, is more or less obsolete now as far as Joe Public in the UK is concerned. I think the BBC World Service still uses it, and that's about it. But I remember staying overnight at my grand's house sometimes when I was younger, around the mid to late 90s. And the room I used to sleep in had this old, immense radio set from like the 50s or 60s.
Oh, amazing.
You know, the ones with the huge tuner
tubes?
Well, no, I don't think it was that old, but it had like 6 or 7 different bands on it.
Yeah.
And printed on the glass were the frequencies of all these long defunct stations that had been popular back in the prehistoric mists of time from whence the thing came. 2 of the bands on there were Shortwave 1 and Shortwave 2. Now, even at that time, going back 20, 25 years nearly, shortwave radio wasn't something that I was familiar with at all. It wasn't something that you came across or heard about day to day. So I remember just being fascinated with this, exploring all these weird and wonderful stations like international broadcasts in languages I didn't even recognise, channels playing kinds of music or discussing topics that you wouldn't find on mainstream radio, weird fundamentalist religious programming. I'd never heard anything like that before. It was another world. It was like the Wild West of broadcasting. I remember thinking, how many people could possibly be listening to some of these stations at any one time? So I went through a bit of a phase of trying to pick up interesting signals. I don't want to give the impression I'm trying to pass as some kind of radio nerd or DXer. I'm not at all. Those guys, the amateur radio guys building their own radios and antennas and that kind of thing, they're wizards as far as I'm concerned. But without any real technical knowledge, I used to spend hours trying to see what strange broadcasts I could find. First at that shortwave radio at my grand's, and then a bit later on I got I think it was a Loitron multiband radio, which I could use to listen to aircraft transmissions, police. I could eavesdrop on people talking on CB radio. If you remember CB radio?
Oh yeah.
And various other bands. I'm peak geek, I know. I dabbled with using like strips of coaxial cable to boost the strength of the reception, not in any directed, precise way, just draping lengths of it over the curtain rail and whatnot. And that seemed to work, at least for shortwave listening. One thing that absolutely sticks in my mind, on a number of occasions, I did hear signals, transmissions, that didn't make sense. Mysterious tones, sounds, staccato beeps, and more than once, strange voices reading lists of numbers. There's something very eerie about sitting alone at night, listening to signals that you know are not meant for you, and being completely in the dark as to their purpose. Who's sending them, who they're for, late at night pulling these weird signals down from the ether on some abandoned backwater frequency band. It's a sinister feeling, like it's in the air, it's around all of us, but you might be the only person in the whole world actually hearing it. It's entrancing and maybe even a little tiny wee bit frightening to a kid sitting alone at night. I later discovered that several of the strange transmissions I heard are what are known as numbers stations. And these are one of the most enduring oddities of the airwaves. And I also discovered that I was far from alone in listening to these strange broadcasts. My own interest trailed off over time, as these things do when you head into adolescence, but many years later, through the internet, I was reminded of these broadcasts and discovered that not only have similar stations been reported for a century, no less, but that for several decades now, enthusiasts have been listening, cataloguing, categorizing and tracking these stations. And this is a good chance, actually, to give some credit before we delve in. The main group that comes to mind, at least in relation to the type of broadcast mystery that we'll be discussing first, is a group called Enigma, the European Numbers Information Gathering and Monitoring Association.
Do you think they decided, right guys, what we're going to call ourselves? It's got to be something cool. Enigma, right? Let's now figure
Backronym this, yes.
100%, yeah, 100%.
Their successor organisation, Enigma 2000. These guys have been monitoring and cataloguing number stations and related transmissions for decades. A more recent group who've done some fascinating work as well is the Number Station Research and Information Centre. We owe a lot of what little we do know about these things to the dedication of groups like Enigma and the NSRIC. Another name I would be remiss not to mention is that of Akin Fernandez. Fernandez is an entrepreneur, electronic musician, cryptography buff, software developer. He's now a huge advocate for Bitcoin and encryption. He's the founder of Azteco, a cryptocurrency voucher vendor based in London. But back in the late 90s, ironically enough, around the same time I was having my first encounters with these things, he became engrossed in making recordings of these elusive stations. And the fruit of his labour was the Conet project, which was a 4-disc, later 5-disc compilation that really is an incredible document of these strange, ephemeral and mysterious broadcasts.
I'm in, Martin. I'm in. I'm locked into this.
Fernandez really helped get number stations some more mainstream attention. In the last few years, he's made the Conet project available for free online. And in the spirit of fair dealing for educational and research purposes, I've used some brief clips of audio from that in this episode. So we are indebted to Fernandez for his hard work in compiling these wonderful recordings. If you find this interested, do check out the full Conet project. It's a trip. It's fascinating. It's an absolute gem. In the same spirit, we've also used some brief recordings from the NSRIC. I'll try and credit every piece of audio I use as accurately as possible, and I highly recommend checking out the NSRIC's website to learn about the work they do. The level of research and detail they've put together on there goes orders of magnitude beyond what we could ever hope to cover in this episode. If what you're about to hear interests you at all, the NSRIC, Enigma 2000, and the Conet project should be your next ports of call. So, we're banging on about number stations. What are number stations? Many of you will know what these are, but for those who don't, they're broadcasts usually containing blocks of numbers read by a synthesized, disembodied voice. A few are in the format of Morse code or strange electronic tones, and these are broadcast mostly at regular times and predictable frequencies, almost always on the shortwave band. The purpose of these transmissions and the operators of the stations are, at least officially, unknown and unexplained.
Two of our favourite words.
So, here's an example. This is a clip from the NSRIC's recording of a station referred to in their listing as E06, the English Man. There's no individual credit given on their site for this recording.
891 891 891 237 237
Wow. But that's definitely using tape for each number then.
Yeah, it's either synthesized or it's an actor or someone has recorded the words and then they've been chopped up and replayed back. Now, the near exclusive use of HF or shortwave, as it's commonly known, for these mysterious transmissions does perhaps tell us something about their purpose. For much the same reason I was able to listen to programs from far off countries on my grand's old radio, and for the same reason the BBC uses the band for its world service. It suggests that shortwave is chosen, at least in part, for its range. High in the Earth's atmosphere, starting about 60 kilometers altitude and extending up into the vacuum of outer space, is a region known as the ionosphere. This is a place where the atmospheric gases are very thin and bombarded by hard ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Atoms are spread widely apart here. Free electrons can exist in the huge gaps between the atoms without being immediately snatched up. So electrically charged atoms, ions, are plentiful as a result. The electrical properties of this layer have the characteristic of reflecting and refracting high-frequency signals in the shortwave band. What this means for shortwave radio is that signals in this band can be bounced off the ionosphere in a process known as skywave propagation, allowing broadcasts to be made far over the curvature of the Earth that limits most other types of transmission. In fact, in the right conditions, with the right equipment, you can pick up shortwave broadcasts from the opposite side of the planet. What this tells us is, or what it suggests rather, is whoever is running the number stations wants the signal to travel across very large distances over nations, perhaps over continents. The actual sequences of numbers or letters typically change to varying degrees between individual broadcasts on a single station, while the format usually appears to remain the same, which suggests that information is encoded in these transmissions. Messages are being sent to someone with the means to decode them. These broadcasts usually follow a strict timetable, appear with regularity on the same frequencies, and have a consistent audio call sign of one kind or another. I'm going to play now, Mike, the beginning of a transmission from a now defunct number station known as the Lincolnshire Poacher. So called because the call sign uses the melody from an old English folk song by that name. Here it goes. This is a short clip from the station's inclusion on the CONET project, recording by Akin Fernandez. It's quite jolly, isn't it?
Oh God, it's the DMT elves.
39715. 39715. 39715.
Jesus, that is bizarre.
Isn't it?
It evokes something almost like a grim fairy tale.
Yeah.
That type of music for some reason in my head.
Both old and sort of mythic, but also
Yeah.
space age, creepy, cosmic. I don't know how to really quite pin it down, but as you said before, Michael, you can probably tell just by listening to that those numbers were read by an automated voice. So either someone has recorded a voice actor reading numbers 1 to 9, and then those recordings are rearranged by computer or by machine of some other kind.
I don't think that one was a human voice. The 5 sounded not quite right.
The other alternative is that they're entirely machine synthesized, which may well be the case here.
Yeah.
But this is not true of every number station and not every broadcast. Some also use letters instead of numbers. Some use coded phrases. Some don't use automation, as we shall see, but the large majority of these stations seem to have a similar format to this. And that's interesting too, because if you think about it, nowadays it would be a piece of piss to do this on a computer, to just whip up a file in Audacity or run it through a text-to-speech program. But there are reports of these synthetic voice stations going back to like the 70s at least, possibly as far back as the 50s and 60s. The technology to do this, or to do it easily and at scale, was not household technology in any of these decades. I suspect, in some ways, to produce one of these automated messages every day, or multiple times a day in some cases, using Cold War era technology, would be almost, if not more challenging to someone without large amounts of resources than the actual broadcasting around the world on shortwave thing.
Do the numbers change then?
Yeah. For this to be something that's done in a household or done by some enthusiast, technologically possible, but I think indicative of someone with resources. If we're looking at someone doing this in their attic like, you know, in the 70s or something, looping these messages. What if they got like a 4-track tape recorder or something? That's a lot more labour intensive than just picking up a microphone and speaking into it. They would just use their voice. But it's when you get to the industrial scale and organisations with large budgets, that's when automation would have become practical. So the existence of these automated voices implies the existence of a piece of machinery where someone maybe types in a message and it's translated into these audible codes. As it turns out, such machines did and do exist, but the point is, the folks running these in the mid-20th century must have been people who had access to such, for that time, advanced technology. So it tells us this likely isn't some hobbyist thing. But there's also a lot of variation within the genre of number stations. Some are the voices of men, some are the voices of women. This is a clip from the NSRIC's recording of E17Z, or Z.
6, 7, 4. 6, 7, 4. 6, 7, 4. 2, 3, 9. 2, 3, 9.
Do you know what it's like, Martin? See, because there's a synthetic quality to it, a non-human quality to it.
Yeah.
It sounds almost like you're listening to a dead person.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a strange way, it almost... I don't know why it evokes that when I listen to that. And I mean, I have to say, I don't know a great deal about number stations, but I know a little bit about them. So I have read about them before, and I have listened to a few, and I think I spent one night absolutely freaking myself out. But listening to these as you play them now, I mean, it's maybe not deliberate on the part of the people who are broadcasting these, I don't know, but there's something eerie, incredibly unnerving, and the idea of you as a teenager on your own listening to these.
Not a lot, maybe once or twice, like a cop might have been parts of one, but it's something about the sense of distance and the hiss of the static and the faintness of the signal and the emotionless...
It's like coming from the void.
Yeah.
If you don't know where it's coming from, then it feels almost like it comes from elsewhere.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, it feels a bit like that.
Yeah.
I did hear, like when you were talking about some of the things earlier on that you heard, I did, when I was younger, I did detune stations and listen to what was going on in between. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I ever heard numbers being said, but I definitely heard a lot of little beeps and things like that that I think might be part of actual broadcasts. But yeah, this is creepy. When
pieces of machinery and stuff emit, you know, a certain frequency, that's usually picked up as a beep on radio. A beep just means there's like a spike. That's all it means. Like on an FM, it just means there's a spike. It can be like internally generated by the radio even sometimes. But yeah, there's a lot of really weird sounds out there, and you don't know where they're coming from. But yeah, there's a feeling like almost like someone's hooked up a Ouija board to like a voice generator or something.
Yeah.
It's definitely strange.
What a great idea for a story.
True.
You should write that.
You'll also have noticed there's a large variety of accents and even languages used. And some stations have voices that are strange sounding.
Zero, 3, 6, 5. Rider, 0, 1, 1. 0, 8, 1, 1.
So
that's a person.
Well,
that's
yeah.
That sounds like a person to me.
That is
in a room.
NSRIC's recording of a station they refer to as E25 Rebeat. And I think rebeat is in reference to the call sign that you heard there at the start. I think what she's actually saying is repeat, but everything is spoken with such an uncommon emphasis That broadcast is believed to originate in Egypt, so maybe that could explain it. I'm not particularly familiar with Egyptian accents. If any of our listeners are, perhaps they can share some insight there. Yeah, like you say, I think that is an actual person speaking. If not an actual person live speaking, it may be that they have recorded someone announcing these lines and then chopped them up.
You can hear the room reverberation in it.
And you can hear when she rolls her R's.
Yeah.
There's a different number of rolls in each time she does it. So yeah, I think part of the reason that sounds so unusual is there's an attempt to over enunciate to overcome the legibility problems of a weak signal. But it's certainly very distinctive. The number station, known to enthusiasts as Swedish Rhapsody, uses eerie bells as its intro song.
So that's another great band name.
Yeah.
Sorry, Swedish Rhapsody.
And it has what some have referred to, Michael, as a child's voice as the announcer.
Oh no.
Again,
Oh no. No thanks.
it is
no
creepy.
Thanks.
This is from Akin Fernandez's recording from the Conet project.
Oh no. Pennywise. It's a mix of German and English.
I think that was all German, actually.
I don't know why the first time I thought it sounded like she was.
You might be right, but I think she is speaking German all the way through. And this, Michael, this is known as the Gong Station. Again, this is just a short clip from Akin Fernandez's Conet project. Hold on to your bum for this one. It's so good.
Sounds like Doctor Who.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Pardon me?
I'm glad I didn't stumble on this at midnight when I was a kid.
There's definitely that. Excuse me while I use my musical ear. That instrument is played, but obviously the pitch is changing. But it sounds like something that's played because you can hear when some of the notes are hit.
That's definitely a real instrument.
Yeah, you can hear the tubes next to it.
Yeah, you can hear reverberation. And I think, Michael, the reason the pitch is changing is the intro is probably on an old tape that's been played thousands of times.
Yeah.
And it's stretched or something. It sounds like a poltergeist got loose in the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. That's what it sounds like. I'm not going to lie, though. If I came upon this on Spotify, I'd probably click follow artist. It kind of slaps, I've got to say. Although rare, there are broadcasts, as we've said, that do not use automated voices. Morse code is still used for some, although it was more common in previous decades. In fact, it's believed that the earliest number stations probably all used Morse code. Anton Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, as a young boy during the First World War, discovered strings of numbers being broadcast in Morse on shortwave frequencies, apparently from enemy nations. Austria-Hungary, of course, being part of the Axis powers during that conflict, the broadcasts he was picking up were coming out of Italy, Russia, and even one, apparently, broadcasting from the Eiffel Tower in Paris.
Wow.
Young Anton Habsburg would spend hours every day writing down pages and pages of these Morse code transmissions, and although, just like the number stations of today, encoded and useless to civilians, he would hand over each day's scribblings to the relevant Austrian military authorities. That's a little aside, but the point being, this makes number stations, originally in Morse code format, over 100 years old. Their prevalence then seems to have expanded massively in the mid-20th century, coinciding with the Cold War. These facts, again, perhaps allow us to home in a wee bit on the who and the why of these broadcasts. So, they first appeared during wartime. The transmissions appeared to come out of opposing nations, but were focused on broadcasting into enemy territory. They became more common during the Cold War, and the broadcasters seem in many cases to be using technology that's quite specialised and advanced for the time. Now, a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, will be familiar with number stations and will already know what they're for, but if you're not already familiar with the concept, and if you're starting to think that nation states might be behind most of these stations, then you're starting to think along the right lines. In addition to stations using automated voices and Morse code, as we've seen, there are some live read stations, that is, broadcasts where the numbers are read out by an actual flesh and blood human being. They seem to have been more common in the early days, but they do still pop up from time to time. The following was recorded being broadcast out of North Korea on the 27th of April 2017. This particular recording comes from the NSRIC website.
지금부터 17호 탐사대원들을 위한 원격 교육대학 정보기술 기초복습과제를 알려드리겠습니다. 문제를 부르겠습니다. 823페이지 69번, 467페이지 92번.
Now, that is a live or recorded human being speaking, not a machine of any kind, translated into English thanks to a user named HLKAFM. She says, "From now we will send IT basic practice problems for agent number 27. Now we will tell the number of problems: 823, page number 69, 467, page number 92, 957, page number 100, and so on." She goes on for almost 15 minutes straight. I wasn't going to play you the whole thing, obviously. Basic IT practice for agents. What's most interesting about this broadcast, Michael, is that it's the only known number station to broadcast on FM instead of shortwave. Presumably in part because North Korea are not trying to hide this activity. They want it out in the open where the maximum possible number of people are going to hear it, because showing off that they're capable of reaching across the 38th parallel is part of their psychological warfare operations. They want to have it out there on the most public-facing radio band, and partly because the intended recipients are not particularly far away. They're just over the border. In fact, Seoul is only about 120 miles from Pyongyang. They don't need the long-range capabilities of shortwave. And this is not just on their own random frequency. These messages are put out in between programming on North Korea's government-owned radio station, Radio Pyongyang. This little snippet of music that you heard at the start, before the voice came in, that was normal service coming to a stop before the state-run organ of the Workers' Party of Korea starts broadcasting a coded numbers message.
I think I mentioned to you recently about a film called The Vast of Night.
Yeah.
It does involve people using radios to pick up strange transmissions and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what was really interesting about the sound that was playing, the music that was playing, is that it reminded me very much of some of the score of that film.
Yeah, right.
So I'm wondering if the composer has listened to these.
Maybe he composed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is coming directly from an official government source. It doesn't really get much more explicit than that, does it? This station originally broadcast on shortwave until 2000, when it disappeared following the 2000 Inter-Korean Summit, which led to a slight thawing of relations between the two Koreas. Its reappearance in the latter part of the 2010s led to condemnation from the South Korean government, which is aware, of course, that these broadcasts have an espionage purpose. In 2016, Jeong Jun-hee, a Unification Ministry spokesman, stated in a press conference, "We can't speak conclusively about North Korea's hidden intentions behind the broadcasting, but we urge North Korea desist from such outdated practices and seek ways to promote inter-Korean ties." It seems to me fanciful and astonishing to think that some of those strange broadcasts I listened to in my bedroom as a kid, not this particular one obviously, but in general, some were genuinely coded messages for spies. But that does, in almost all cases, seem to be true.
Does that mean that every number station knows for that purpose?
As far as we can tell, we will get a little bit more into this in the 2011 book Spycraft by Robert Wallace and H. Keith Melton. Some light is shone on this shady practice. The book was compiled by experts in espionage tradecraft. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I can say it's an absolutely smashing read if, like me, this sort of thing interests you. So, according to Wallace and Melton, these broadcasts are indeed a means of communications with embedded agents working and living in foreign territory. A number station specifically can be linked to a technique known in the craft as OWVL, or one-way voice link. So the receiving agent would be briefed to listen for communications on a certain frequency using a shortwave capable radio, and he or she would also be provided with a set of what are called one-time pads. Now, these could be in the form of a little printed booklet of codes, or in more recent times it could be a piece of software that does the same job. But essentially, if you imagine each broadcast has its own decryption key, for simplicity's sake, let's say each block of numbers read out represents a letter of the alphabet. The person receiving checks the numbers against the key and swaps the numbers for letters or words, and be sure to drink your Ovaltine or whatever, right? But the most important thing, the thing that makes number station broadcasts absolutely unbreakable, is that each key is or should only be used once, hence one-time pad. The methods for breaking codes involve looking for patterns and repetition in the messages. That becomes impossible if the key to the code changes with every single message. Unless you can get hold of that one-time pad, you're shit out of luck. Even if you manage to get hold of one, it's useless for the next transmission. So the agent will either have a timetable for what code key to use on what date, or there will be some element at the start of each broadcast indicating which page in the booklet to use, or indicating to the decryption software what key to use, and then once used, that key is discarded. Wallace and Melton state, if proper tradecraft was practiced and instructions were precisely followed, an OWVL transmission was considered unbreakable as long as the agent's cover could justify possessing a shortwave radio and he was not under technical surveillance. High-frequency OWVL was a secure and preferred system for the CIA during the Cold War. What's more, in the years since the Cold War, there has been observed an increasing use of techniques such as data bursts in conjunction with numbers transmissions. This is where digital information is modulated into the broadcast, presumably allowing spy masters to send computer files to agents over shortwave radio. They sound a little screechy, kind of like old modem sounds.
Like a ZX Spectrum loading?
Yeah, exactly. I should have mentioned that to you because I know that's your touchstone for
everything, Martin.
Yeah.
My entire life.
In the late 1990s, there was a series of high-profile criminal trials in the United States that serves as a handy illustration for how this all works, and also, probably for the first time, gave the public a glimpse of the actual content of some of these messages. So, in 1999, 5 Cuban intelligence officers were arrested in Miami, where they'd been infiltrating Cuban exile groups. This was known as the Cuban 5 case, or the Atención spy case. As I'm sure you know, Miami is only like 90 miles north of Cuba.
Yeah. You could hit it with a rock.
Yeah, I mean, people
Maybe
cross it in like rowing boats and stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a huge Cuban exile population in Florida, particularly around the Miami area, and a number of organized groups based there formed of people who have sought political asylum from Cuba, or whose parents or grandparents sought political asylum there in the US. Groups like Brothers to the Rescue, Alpha 66, the F4 Commandos, the Cuban American National Foundation. Several of these groups have at various times been involved in activities ranging from the humanitarian, like patrolling the Straits of Florida looking for Cuban refugees, helping newly arrived immigrants, to overtly anti-communist direct action, violating Cuban airspace, for example, to drop anti-Castro leaflets over Havana, all the way up to, allegedly, in some cases, terrorist violence against the Cuban state itself. Alpha 66 and the F4 Commandos appear to have been openly paramilitary in nature. So of course, from the Cuban government's point of view, these are not merely grassroots citizens organizations in Florida. They see these, or they saw these, as puppet organizations being used by the United States to provoke and attack Cuba by proxy. And there may well be some truth to that. Membership of several of these groups included former members of the CIA, for example. But anyway, the rights and wrongs of both sides here are a complex business we could spend all night talking about, and I don't pretend to be well informed enough on the political situation to be able to pass judgment. Either way, it doesn't really matter for the purposes of the present story. What's important is Cuba was directing embedded agents living in Florida to infiltrate and interfere with these groups, and, well, to cut a long story short, they got caught. Gerardo Hernandez, Antonio Guerrero, Ramon Labanino, Fernando Gonzalez, and Rene Gonzalez were arrested as members of the so-called WASP network and indicted on conspiracy to commit espionage, acting as agents of a foreign government, and in the case of Hernandez, conspiracy to commit murder. That charge was in relation to the shooting down of two Brothers to the Rescue Cessnas that had been overflying Cuba, killing 4 Brothers to the Rescue members. By the time those planes were intercepted and destroyed, they were already back in international airspace. Hold that thought. It turns out the FBI had been keeping an eye on the WASP network as a whole for at least a couple of years prior to the arrests. In 1995, federal agents were able to enter the home of another WASP agent. WASP agent sounds like something from James Bond, I love it. This guy wasn't one of the Cuban 5. We'll call him Sir Not Appearing in this film. And they made a copy of the hard drive on his or her laptop, and then they left undetected. Among the drive's contents, they discovered a program designed to decrypt coded messages from a particular number station, a station known to the wider world as Atención. Here is a recording of that station from the NSRIC.
Atención, 3, 8, 9, 5, 9, 0, 4, 4, 7, 3.
Okay, so the station itself isn't one of the highlights of the genre, Michael.
Short but sweet.
You know, it's not got that kind of Jean-Michel Jarre aesthetic as some of them do. It's not quite as spooky as other ones, but the feds having this software means they were in possession of the whole book of codes and were then able to listen in and decode subsequent messages on that number station for a number of years. And the messages they decoded would provide them with important intelligence on the group's activities. 3 of the decrypted communiques have been made public following the trial, and they are as follows. These are actual number station messages decoded into plain text and translated from Spanish to English. This is a very rare glimpse behind the curtain of espionage, one of the only times in history the contents of a number station message have been shared with the public. So here goes. Prioritize and continue to strengthen friendship with Joe and Dennis. That refers to 2 high-ranking members of military personnel at Boca Chica Air Base. In other words, focus your efforts on building trust with these high-value targets. Congratulate all the female comrades for International Day of the Woman. More innocuous message. sent out on International Women's Day,
I'm
March
glad there's
8th.
a bit of equality going on in there.
Yeah, I quite like that one. It made them seem a little bit more friendly, apart from the murder.
Yeah, well, you know.
Rather less harmless though. Under no circumstances should agents German nor Castor fly with BTTR, Brothers to the Rescue, or another organisation on days 24, 25, 26 and 27. Now, the Brothers to the Rescue planes were indeed shot down by a Cuban MiG-29UB on the 24th of February 1996.
Wow.
So that would appear to suggest that the destruction of the Cessnas may have been a premeditated act planned with intelligence gleaned by the WASP network. And this is HQ giving their spies a heads up not to be on board when that happened.
Pretty grim.
It is. The Cuban Five were all convicted on all counts against them. They all spent several years behind bars, but all of them have now been released as a result of various prisoner swaps and whatnot. And in fact, these swaps, ironically, helped lead to a thawing of hostilities between the two nations. We've focused on a case involving Cuba here just purely because those events are a matter of public record. That's not to say that Cuba is any more prolific in its use of number stations and this kind of espionage than other nations. Lots of nations appear to operate these services or have done in the past. The Lincolnshire poacher, which I played earlier in the episode, was determined by members of the Enigma group to have been emanating from in or around the Royal Air Force Base in Akrotiri in Cyprus, and was almost certainly a spy station operated by MI6, the British Foreign Intelligence Service. It also appears to have or had a sister station, codenamed Cherry Ripe. Not an adult performer, Michael, but a number station seemingly broadcast from both Guam and Australia at different times. Again,
The Las Vegas Strip.
Again, most likely run by MI6, but this one targeting British agents operating in East Asia. Eastern Europe, meanwhile, appears to be absolutely bristling with number stations transmitters. Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Poland, Ukraine, Russia, of course, all seem to operate or have operated number stations from home soil. Elsewhere, Egypt, as we've said, Mossad ran quite a famous number station, or rather a letters station from Tel Aviv in Israel. China has a few, Taiwan, and of course the USA, as we mentioned briefly in relation to the Spycraft book. The USA has operated a good number of its own over the years. Here's one mystery station which was broadcast from the desert somewhere in the region of Albuquerque, whose call sign, I think you'll agree, Michael, is about as stereotypically American as it gets.
Is that I'm going to blow you to smithereens?
That was Yosemite Sam.
Right, yeah. Amazing.
I don't think we need to explain why it's called Yosemite. Maybe we do. Maybe we do need to explain that, just because
Time.
old duffers like us recognise him doesn't mean younger people will. Yeah, so Yosemite Sam, they used an actual recording from an old cartoon. Anyway, here's Cynthia from the NSRIC website. Original recording from a YouTube channel called Industrial One.
7, 9, 7, 7, 9, 7, 7, 9, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 7, 9, 7.
So Cynthia came off the air in the early 2000s, but when the station was running, it wasn't broadcast from a single point, but seems to have been relayed to numerous transmission sites around the globe, all located either within US territory or in countries allied to the US, suggesting this was a really important service for the CIA, hence Cynthia, to communicate with its agents worldwide. As such, it was something that clearly made nations on unfriendly terms with the USA quite uncomfortable, and it was a regular target of some very sophisticated jamming attempts. Jamming, simply put, is where someone broadcasts something else on the same frequencies as you to either completely drown out your signal or interfere with it enough to render it unintelligible. This kind of jamming still happens in the Koreas and elsewhere. Back in the day, of course, it was commonplace for Soviet-backed states to jam American and Western broadcasts during the Cold War and vice versa. And not only number stations, of course, the Soviet Union spent much of the mid to late 20th century trying to jam the likes of BBC World Service, Radio Free Europe, Radio Vatican, things it considered a decadent capitalist influence. They were so into this that they actually launched special satellites just to improve their jamming capability. And unlicensed pirate broadcasters operating within the USSR got the same treatment as well. If me suddenly moving on to the subject of pirate broadcasters and jamming seems like a wee bit of a non sequitur, Michael.
Great segue.
It sounds like I'm arbitrarily moving away from number stations. That's because it is indeed a very clumsy segue into our second, somewhat related but not really, subtopic, and that is the equally mysterious world of broadcast signal intrusions. Michael, I want you to cast your mind back.
Hold on. Okay, I'm casting.
You don't know where we're going yet.
Alright, okay.
It's the 26th of November, 1977. You were a slightly younger man then, I know. So you're what, about 30 or so?
I was dead.
I know you weren't actually born then, but for the purpose of narrative expediency, we're going to cast you as a young boy sitting cross-legged in front of the flickering glow of an old wood panel TV. There's some ugly geometric wallpaper going on. You're wearing flares, smoking a cigarette, and dousing yourself in Old Spice.
Ah, beautiful.
Just how I imagine the 70s smelled in general. It's just coming up for dinner time. Your parents are out of the room. The ITN news is just coming to an end. You're waiting for it to be over because there's a cartoon on after. As it will turn out, you're going to get to see that cartoon, but you're going to hear something else entirely. At 5:10 p.m, the picture jumped, and a piercing, buzzing sound erupted from television speakers all across Berkshire and North Hampshire. The picture continued to play, but instead of the familiar Looney Tunes theme, viewers heard a strange, distorted voice reading the following message.
This is the voice of Vrillin, a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you.
Sorry.
For many years you have seen us as lights in the skies. We speak to you now in peace and wisdom as we have done to your brothers and sisters all over this, your planet Earth. We come to warn you of the destiny of your race and your world so that you may communicate to your fellow beings the course you must take to avoid the disaster which threatens your world, and the beings on our worlds around you. This is in order that you may share in the Great Awakening as the planet passes into the new age of Aquarius. The new age can be a time of great peace and evolution for your race, but only if your rulers are made aware of the evil forces that can overshadow their judgments. Be still now and listen, for your chance may not come again. All your weapons of evil must be removed. The time for conflict is now past, and the race of which you are a part may proceed to the higher stages of its evolution if you show yourselves worthy to do this. You have but a short time to learn to live together in peace and goodwill. Small groups all over the planet are learning this, and exist to pass on the light of the dawning new age to you all. You are free to accept or reject their teachings, but only those who learn to live in peace will pass to the higher realms of spiritual evolution. Hear now the voice of Vrillin, a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you. Be aware also...
So he doesn't have to go on, Vrillin, I'm sorry about this, but...
Be aware also that there are many false...
Aliens are like
I know,
that,
they
mate.
can't get him to shut up.
There are many false prophets and guides at present operating on your world. They will suck your energy from you, the energy you call money, and will put it to evil ends, and give you worthless dross in return. Your inner divine...
It sounds like Wish. It sounds like he's warning us of Wish.com.
Your inner divine self will protect you from this. You must learn to be sensitive to the voice within that can tell you what is truth, and what is confusion, chaos, and untruth. Learn to listen to the voice of truth which is within you, and you will lead yourselves onto the path of evolution. This is our message to our dear friends. We have watched you growing for many years, as you too have watched our lights in your skies. You know now that we are here, and that there are more beings on and around your Earth than your scientists will admit.
Blasted scientists, always keeping it secret.
I know.
We are deeply concerned about you and your path towards the light, and will do all we can to help you. Have no fear, seek only to know yourselves and live in harmony with the ways of your planet Earth. We here at the Ashtar Galactic Command thank you for your attention. We are now leaving the planes of your existence. May you be blessed by the supreme love and truth of the cosmos.
Now here's Brenda with the weather. Tell me it was over one of the old Looney Tunes cartoons with Marvin the Martian. Tell me. Hello, humans.
So you can well imagine that this led to a certain degree of confusion and consternation, as well-meaning as the message appeared to be. Did an emissary of an extraterrestrial galactic federation really make contact with people of Berkshire during the Woody Woodpecker show? Probably not, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But this incident, known as the Southern Television Broadcast Interruption, was the first known major broadcast signal intrusion. A thing that would become a bit of a, not quite a craze, but certainly would happen with much more frequency in the years thereafter, by different groups for a variety of different purposes. A broadcast signal intrusion is essentially a hijacking of the broadcast transmission, allowing the attacker to replace the sound and or the video of the official broadcast, getting their own message, or programming even, out to the audience of that television station. This is done in a number of ways, including by brute force, so with your own FM transmitter just blasting out on the same frequency as the TV station, powerfully enough to drown out the intended broadcast over a limited area. A form of jamming, essentially. Or by physically breaking into transmitter sites or the actual TV stations to inject their own feed directly into the broadcaster's own hardware. And some other more complex means that we'll talk about in a sec. In pretty much all jurisdictions, of course, interfering with licensed broadcast is a criminal act, so the attackers usually take steps to conceal their identities, and this has led to some of the weirdest and quirkiest mysteries of the airwaves, and we'll cover a few of those here. But Michael, back to our galactic pal. Later that same evening, after Vrillen's wee speech, the on-air continuity announcer came on to apologise for what they called a breakthrough in sound, and in the following days the Independent Broadcasting Authority announced that a hoax had been carried out, and it was the first time such a hoax had ever been executed to their knowledge. The incident was ample fodder for tabloids and news items over the following days, for both tongue-in-cheek fluff stories and alarmist speculation. It was reported on at least as far afield as the United States, and may have been the inspiration for some of the intrusions that came after. So, if it was a hoax, how was it done? Well, the IBA investigated this event and in fact did identify the method used. The area over which the message was heard was an area served by the Hannington UHF television transmitter. Bear in mind, this is old school analog over-the-air broadcast. We're talking not cable or satellite or digital or any of that. The Hannington transmitter, unusually for a terrestrial transmitter in the UK, was fed programming not by a fixed link cable or landline, but by rebroadcasting a signal beamed to it by radio from the Isle of Wight, I think. This made the Hannington transmitter uniquely vulnerable to this kind of interference. If an attacker had been able to get close enough to the transmitter and broadcast their message powerfully enough at its receivers on the frequency that the Isle of Wight transmitter used to send the feeder signal, with all the right parameters, then that message could be picked up by the Hannington station and rebroadcast over its transmission area as part of the television broadcast. And that seems to be what was done, but Vrillen himself and the actual perpetrators of the intrusion were never identified. Having said that, there are some clues in the message itself that might give us a little bit of insight here. It's often reported to have been a prank, a lark. In fact, Michael, I don't believe that's the most likely explanation. Vrillen mentions that he is contacting Earth on behalf of something called the Ashtar Galactic Command, This is not something someone's just made up for the transmission. Ashtar Shiran, to give him his full name, is a supposed extraterrestrial entity at the centre of a sort of new age, hippy-dippy kind of UFO religion. Although I don't think they refer to themselves as a religion.
Or hippy-dippy.
Maybe not. They're like a loose theology sometimes called the Ashtar movement. At certain times, they have referred to themselves as the Ashtar Command. And it loosely stems from the work of a chap called George Van Tassel, who was a key figure in the contactee movement starting in the 40s and 50s. Ashtar is like this divine Christ-like entity in the movement's theology. The group claim to be able to channel psychic messages sent to them by Ashtar and other extraterrestrial messengers, and from what I can gather, the content of those is very much in line with what was said in the broadcast. It's all fairly standard New Age spiritualist stuff.
Please buy our t-shirts.
Yeah.
I was going to say, when we were listening to the Number Station broadcasts, that a couple of them sounded like there was a gentleman on a really early Louis Theroux documentary in the Weird Weekend.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw that. And
Yeah.
this is center control.
Yeah, I think that's these guys. I think that's
and he spoke like sort of elongating his R's and all that. Like he sounded just like the Number Stations.
These guys have had the usual conventions and communes and a few failed predictions, Michael.
Just a few, just a tad.
Aye, you need to have at least 5 or 10 failed predictions before you're a proper cult, I think. But the message, as read out by Vrillin, I think actually makes oblique reference to the movement itself. Small groups all over the planet are learning this and exist to pass on the light of the dawning new age to you all. I think the hijackers were devotees of the Ashtar movement, or at least influenced heavily by that, and the purpose of their intrusion was indeed an intention to pass on the light of the dawning new age to the people of Berkshire. I think it was an honest, straight-faced attempt to spread a message that the hijackers, human hijackers, genuinely believed in. Of course, there's always the other interpretation, isn't there?
Aliens.
Well, yeah. As folklorist John Reppian says in an interview with The Independent when they did a piece looking back on the event in 2017, unlike so many of the broadcast interruptions which came after, mostly in the USA, there is nothing prankish about the Vrillin interruption. There is no punchline or rug pull, no swearing or obscenity or explicit protest of the specific TV station or media in general. That keeps it ambiguous enough that there's still this glimmer of possibility, no matter how tiny, that the whole thing was, and is, somehow real. Some people believe it wholeheartedly, of course, but even for those of us who don't, there's still something fascinating and exciting about the notion of hearing a non-human, non-terrestrial voice. An unsolved case is always much more intriguing than a solved one. Everyone loves a good mystery, and the fact that those responsible for the interruption were never caught or came forward gives the whole incident this wonderfully open-ended intrigue, this air of what if. You'll notice that Reppion mentions there other, later intrusions involving obscene content. So, on that point, we turn our attention now from a well-meaning message of celestial enlightenment to the most obnoxious kind of nasty caveman bullshit. On Wednesday, May 17th, 2006, on the rock station WBAB in Babylon, Long Island, the morning DJ Ted Lidner was leading into the song Hey You by Pink Floyd when a jammer interrupted the broadcast with a racist song by the hate folk artist Johnny Rebel. Now, Mike, I listened to this song while researching this, and the sheer nastiness kinda took my breath away.
Really?
Nasty, nasty shit. The song title is Insert Racial Slur Here, Hating Me. If you don't know what slur it is, it's probably the first one that comes to mind. To put it mildly, the song is all about hating black Americans. It alludes to government welfare checks. It smears Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It makes comparisons with non-human animals. It's gross. It's gross. Now, a YouTube channel called MTN's Music Collection has a capture of the moment this occurred. Now, obviously, there is value to us hearing what happened, but at the same time, I don't want to rebroadcast it in full because I don't want us to get monetized by some white supremacist record label or something. So yeah, we're just going to play the moment that the radio station is hijacked. We're not going to play the song. The original audio is out there. You can find it if you search for it on YouTube. So this is the moment that WBAB was hijacked by pirates.
3 remaining finalists. The winner will be picked on May 24th. BAB weather today, mix of sun and clouds with a high of 68. I'm Ted Lindner with Roger and JP on Long Island's #1 rock station, 102.3 WBAB.
If you want to hear the recording in full, if you search on YouTube for My Aircheck Collection WBAB Hijacked by Pirates, you should find it on MTN's Music Collection. Just be warned, I want to make it absolutely crystal clear that what's expressed in that song could not be more opposed to the values of Talking Till Dawn. It's totally opposed to my own values as well, and I know I speak for Mike when I say that as well. Fuck the hijackers.
Absolutely.
About halfway into the song, though, a buzzing sound breaks through and blocks out Johnny Rebel, and we begin to hear faint voices which sound like commercials on another channel breaking through, which might have been an attempt by the station to jam out the hijackers, at which point the DJ came back on the air, and this is what he had to say.
102.3 WBAB, Long Island's #1 rock station, plays the most music in the morning. There's John Fogerty, center field. Roger and JP, 721 on BAB. Want to explain to you what just happened on our frequency, 102.3 FM. I've never seen this in 22 years on this radio station, but I have heard about it happening very recently. Someone who wants to broadcast whatever they want to broadcast hacks into our frequency. They find a way to hack into it. I don't know how it's done. I'm not that technical, but they get into our microwave link or something. Our frequencies are public knowledge with the FCC rules, and somehow there's technology that allows people to get in and hack into a radio frequency. So they can do whatever they want and take control, and we sit here and we can turn everything down. It has no effect on it whatsoever because we're just a room distant from our transmitter. So they hack into that, and the broadcast, whatever that was, it was very racist, but whatever it was broadcast, and we have no control. So we called our engineer or whatever, so people are on it right now. But and you heard it, and we came back to Pink Floyd. That is what just happened, and I've heard about it, never heard it happen. That is the weirdest thing I've ever had happen to me in my radio career.
Yeah, let us get ourselves.
Odd thing.
Let's get ourselves together. Let's do Traffic. We'll give you the $1 Million song.
Yeah.
After Traffic.
So the station would later offer a $10,000 reward for information leading to the hijackers, but as far as I can tell, that was never claimed, and the perpetrators were unfortunately never identified. Were they white supremacists? Were they trying to smear the station, perhaps? You know, make it seem like the station had played the song? Was it just some trolls trying to be funny? We don't know. The song's about as funny as a head injury, though. But what it shows the potential for this kind of attack to be used to cause chaos. Instead of a stupid song, if they'd used a hijack to make a direct threat to the black community, for example, or if they'd done a better job of spoofing the station format and actually put out a message that credibly appeared to be part of the actual programming, the potential for sowing upset and discord is quite high.
So there was, I won't name him, but there was a kid that I sort of partially grew up with, and maybe for about 2 or 3 years we were good friends. I would say from about the age of about 11 or 12 until about maybe 13, something like that. We were in a band together, and when the band split up, he turned against us, and we had a lot of bad things happened to my family and all that. Oh, it was terrible, Martin. It was terrible. I can't even go into everything that happened, but there was a lot that went down, basically. I think part of it is that I sort of walked away from that, and I think that when I look back now, I think maybe I ended like the only kind of stable thing in his life.
Oh, so you ended the band,
yeah,
and he was pissed off about it.
Yeah, so there was a lot of stuff that escalated, and it got quite bad over the years. But this guy, he had a lot of tapes and things. When we were playing in this band, we were playing like Guns N' Roses covers and things like that, and Nirvana and all that sort of stuff. So it was like the early 90s. His father, I think if I remember rightly, was really into, there was a group in the UK called the National Front. They were this totally racist organisation. Now, I was brought up, my dad was, he was an old communist. But he brought me up to believe that everyone was equal. Yeah. And I was lucky that way, that I was brought up that way. So it was like a sort of clash of ideas. Yeah. When you're talking about that song, it just reminds me, I remember like sort of sitting, a whole bunch of us in this band, and then there was a few people sort of kicking about, sort of hanger-oners, and some of them were singing these songs. They would sit and they would just start saying some of the lyrics. Not while we were playing music, because I wouldn't have been up for that at all, but he was just really, it just reminded me of that, you know. It was the first time that I was ever exposed to that sort of thing. These songs, this entire industry of bands that were all racist.
Oh yeah, it's huge. There's a section of the folk music industry, there's National Socialist black metal. Yeah. There's whole genres entirely focused on hate. It's crazy.
I grew up with a lot of, I had my close circle of friends, and most of them were from very safe backgrounds. But I also had friends and grew up around people who had really difficult backgrounds. Some of them were rough diamonds, some of them were the product of their environment, and this is a thing where I talked to them about it and tried to say to them why I thought they were wrong about things, and in some cases some of those guys changed their ways, you know, over time, because they realised that they had only, I just thought, I actually pity people who are racist, because I think most of the time, 9 times out of 10, it's someone who's just been around those ideas. If it's all you know, then you kind of soak that up, and it takes you having other experiences and someone else to come around and say, think about this, to really get them out of that way of thinking. This guy, I think, was very much just a product of his father was that way, and he picked that up. And there's a tragic end to that story, but maybe quite a funny one. He ended up trying to rob a bunch of places with a toy gun, and tried to steal a guy's guitar, and the guy who had the guitar on was a student, and he was just like, that's a toy gun, mate. And then he tried to rob a couple of petrol stations. He actually ended up going to jail. But I actually feel sorry for him, because like, I think he should be out now, but hopefully not listening to this. But I do feel sorry for that guy, because I feel like, you know, some people just have a terrible head start in life. They just don't have the right environment to really think straight about things.
Yeah, you're responsible for your choices as well, though. I mean, it's a balancing act, isn't it?
You are, but I'm just saying that can lead to you running about with a toy gun.
But Mike, not every broadcast intruder has got away with it. On Sunday the 6th of September 1987, the Playboy channel was interrupted by text reading, "Thus saith the Lord thy God, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand." And I think some of the viewers might have had something other than the kingdom of heaven at hand.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
Now, the Playboy channel was a satellite and cable channel. Whoever did this had the technical know-how and the hardware to send a feed to the satellite strong enough to overpower the Playboy channel's own signal. Technicians at the Playboy channel's own uplink. Imagine that was your job. What do you do? I'm a technician at the Playboy channel.
Fluffer.
Signal fluffer. Technicians at the Playboy channel's own uplink station captured a high-quality recording of the intrusion, and the FCC were able to find subtle technical fingerprints, essentially, that allowed them to narrow down both the model of transmitter used and the character generator used to produce the message. A combination that led them to one of the uplinks operated by, it's so juicy, Michael, operated by the Christian Broadcasting Network. And specifically to a CBN uplink engineer named Thomas Haney, who was charged and eventually convicted on satellite piracy charges. Amazing name for a crime, the Satellite Pirates. receiving 3 years of probation, a $1,000 fine, and 150 hours of community service for all the frustration that he surely caused.
I kind of imagine a bunch of guys in eye patches with wooden legs sort of riding satellites.
There have also been a handful of occasions where hijackers have jammed regular programming with pornography, including one case in New Jersey where a Disney Channel show called Handy Manny was replaced with a hardcore film, which I like to imagine that one was just a mix-up and they had two unrelated tapes in the control room with Handy Manny on the label. No one was ever
The
caught for those.
perfect crime, ladies and gentlemen. The perfect crime.
Pretty fucked up though, like hacking into a children's channel to put hardcore porn out over a kid's show. You have to wonder about the motivation really. Was it supposed to be a sick joke or was it something darker? But the felony Thomas Haney was convicted of, satellite piracy, that law was written in response to two previous incidents. The first was what's usually known as the Captain Midnight intrusion, and that's an event that one cable TV executive would call video terrorism.
As we've been recording Talking Till Dawn, and I may add for the past year now, or 1 year in, we have found many funny band names or funny people names, but as a band name, Captain Midnight and the Satellite Pirates.
Now, okay, yes.
Is one of the best things I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, okay. Does it count if you choose your own name? We'll find out in a minute, right? But Captain Midnight is the name he gave himself.
For a band name, it doesn't matter. Captain Midnight and the Satellite Pirates. Are you telling me Captain Midnight and the Satellite Pirates is not one of the best band names you've ever heard?
It is pretty good, I'll give you that, right? But I remember a friend of mine telling me that him and his brother were on holiday. Let's say it was Lanzarote or somewhere. They were on holiday and they met this guy that they were talking to at the pool. He seemed pretty cool. They were having a chat and a laugh with him and a few drinks. And they're like, "What's your name, mate? We don't actually know your name." And he's like, "Well, I like people to call me Wolverine." And they laughed like, "Ah." And he looked at them fucking dead. Stone Cold Sober's like, "Wolverine." And to me, that's like, see if you're given that nickname by someone, there's at least a slight bit of you've earned it. But if you make it up for yourself, I don't know. I feel like I've only just got over the phase of trying to think up cool screen names, like a little bit try hard. So on April the 27th, 1986, during a screening of the film The Falcon and the Snowman on HBO, viewers in the eastern half of the United States suddenly saw the movie replaced by color bars, over which the following scandalous text was superimposed. Are you ready for the most shocking message that could possibly be broadcast out across the US?
Yes.
Good evening, HBO, from Captain Midnight. $12.95 a month? No way! And then, in brackets underneath, Showtime and the movie channel, beware. Truly the words of a bloodthirsty terrorist, I think you'll agree.
Video terrorism? Captain Midnight, righter of wrongs.
Yeah.
No way.
$12.95 a month? No way! By a very similar process to what happened in the Playboy case, Captain Midnight was quickly identified as John R. McDougall, a cable TV installation engineer and part-time employee at a satellite ground station in Ocala, Florida. It turned out he was motivated to protest HBO's pricing model because he felt his job as a cable guy was suffering due to the high cost of the packages putting off potential customers. He was charged with illegally operating a satellite uplink transmitter and was fined $5,000.
Gutted.
The other case is probably the most famous broadcast signal intrusion ever carried out. I'm sure you know it, Michael.
Max Headroom?
Yeah, I'm talking about the Max Headroom incident. This one relies pretty heavily on a 1980s cultural reference. We should probably give a bit of context as to what Max Headroom is or was.
I was in about it.
It's actually not that easy to explain, is it? He was sort of an avant-garde cultural phenomenon, really. Could you ever go at explaining it?
Okay, so I may not have the chronology right, but as far as I remember, it used to basically be like on MTV, you had the advent of the video jockey. but he was basically an actor wearing prosthetics.
Yeah.
And he was shot at a weird frame rate, so he would sort of judder around, almost as if he was like computer generated at times.
That was the kind of shtick.
Yeah.
As you say, the shtick was that he was supposed to be this sort of futuristic computer generated AI personality.
But he actually had
like,
his own TV show eventually.
He did.
And it had the actor who played him play another part, if I remember rightly. I don't know. It was all very strange.
It was a weird thing. But the character is like this, if you imagine like a super genericized plastic blonde white perfect teeth TV host kind of archetype, almost like a parody of the stereotypical TV host. And yeah, like you're right, so he was sort of supposed to be CG, but computer graphics weren't quite up to the job in 1985. So instead he was played by Matt Frewer under heavy makeup to make him look CGI. So he's like plastic face, Ray-Bans, shiny plastic business suit. But Mikey was placed in front of a background that was CGI. It was like an ever-changing animation of geometric designs. It was actually done on the Amiga, I believe.
Really? Wouldn't it have been the toaster, would it?
I think that might have been actually later.
A
The
bit later.
video toaster, I think it was.
Babylon 5. That was all done on the toaster.
That's right. Max would talk a load of absolute bollocks, and the pitch of his voice would shift all over the place, and the footage would jump and cut and stutter. As you say, like the frame rate was weird, almost like an early form of glitch art or YouTube poop. I watched a little bit of it while I was preparing for this, and it's a load of absolute toss.
Yeah, but I tell you something, I loved it.
Oh yeah, it was a real novelty at the time, and I mean it was fucking huge in the 80s, so I'm told.
It's one of those strange things that is super edgy for a while within the context of the culture, and then it becomes...
And then drops out of fashion so hard.
Yeah, then it becomes aged terribly in a very short space of time.
He had a movie, he had a science fiction show, he was in Coca-Cola commercials for a while, almost everywhere. So that's Max Headroom, the character, the official Max Headroom TM, right? The Max Headroom incident began on WGN-TV Chicago's 9 o'clock news on November 22nd, 1987. In the middle of the sports segment, the screen went black and the only sound was a low electrical hum. After 15 seconds of this, a grotesque face appeared. The man was wearing a cheap Max Headroom mask, which gave the impression of a head too big for the shoulders, with like a fixed rictus grin in front of a swivelling sheet of corrugated iron rigged up to resemble the geometric backgrounds of the real Max Headroom show. There was no speech, and the low hum stuttered to a grating, screeching drone. After a few seconds of this bizarre imagery, the screen went black again as the engineers at WGN switched broadcast band. The sportscaster looked a bit puzzled, made a crack about the show's computers freaking out, and then everything went on as normal. The event would probably not be as notorious today if things had ended there. Over on WTTN, a late night showing of the Doctor Who serial The Horror of Fang Rock was interrupted by the same masked figure. So it's quite creepy, I have to say. Here's the audio.
I'll get you a hot drink.
Some dry clothes.
Sure this isn't actually Max Headroom?
far as I can tell, a massive electric shock. He died instantly.
Oh, good old Tom Baker at the
I
end
know.
there.
So this freakish Max Headroom guy bursts onto the screen. The setup is the same as the WGN intrusion. This time he speaks. He says, "That does it. He's a frickin' nerd." Then he giggles and says, "Yeah, I think I'm better than Chuck Swirsky, frickin' liberal." Swirsky was a newscaster on WGN. And he comes up with a Pepsi can, says, "Catch the wave," which was the real Max Headroom's catchphrase on his Coke commercials. Then he throws the can out of shot. Headroom holds up a bulbous middle finger, which may be some kind of hollowed out sex toy. He picks up the Coke can again and says, "Your love is fading," before humming the theme song to the 1950s cartoon show Clutch Cargo. He says, "Oh my piles," and writhes around in pain. Then he announces, "Oh, I just made a giant masterpiece for all the greatest world newspaper nerds." The call sign of WGN stands for World's Greatest Newspaper. He screams and writhes around, reaches out of shot and picks up what looks like a gardening glove. He says, "My brother is wearing the other one, it's dirty." Then suddenly the shot changes. The Max Headroom mask is hanging in the front of the shot. The man who was previously wearing it is in the back of the shot. His face is still hidden. He's got his arse out. At the right hand side of the shot is a female figure wearing some kind of costume. Max shouts, "Come get me, bitch," and then the woman starts spanking him on the backside with a fly swatter. He screams and cries, "They're coming to get me, make it stop." Then the screen flickers and Tom Baker's back. It's surreal, sort of funny, but mostly just grotesque. Intentionally or not, for what's presumably an amateur production of sorts, it actually does a shockingly good job of capturing a feverish nightmarishness that I've rarely seen equalled even in actual horror films. And these events were heavily investigated. The FCC were involved. The unknown perpetrators were threatened with a $100,000 fine, a year in prison, or both, but nothing ever came of it. No one was ever charged. It's another one that's entered the realms of urban legend, and if I'm honest, it's such a weird event, I think, even more than like the Vrillion event and whatnot. This is one that really deserves its reputation. All we have on the creators of the Max Headroom incident is speculation. It's a true unsolved mystery. There appears to be at least 2 people involved, possibly 3. The fact that they haven't come forward is probably wise given the penalties involved. The complete vacuum of information has led to a lot of weird theories and conjecture, as well as some more informed investigation. On November the 1st, 2010, a programmer by the name of Bowie J. Pogue posted on Reddit that he believed he knew who was responsible, that it was 2 older aged brothers he befriended when he was a teenager who had a weird sense of humour and an involvement in the hacking and freaking scenes. I encourage you to check this out for yourself. It's a huge long post that's been added to over the years. It's absolutely worth a read.
What's the freaking?
That's freaking, PHREAK.
Oh.
Phone freaking, it was essentially the precursor to computer hacking, finding ways to manipulate the telephone system. Not to give too much away, but this thread that Pogue created led him to get in contact with a journalist, and their joint investigations eventually took them to members of the broadcasting community in Chicago at the time, and the information they provided then led them in another direction altogether. It's way too much to cover here, and it's all very much still unresolved and conjectural, but it's a massive rabbit hole and I highly recommend exploring it yourselves. If you search for "I believe I know who was behind the Max Headroom incident," that should take you to the first Reddit post and get you started off. But before we go, I want to play one last recording. So don't get that stuck in your head, Michael. I know it's a real earworm.
Try not
That
to.
was the buzzer, also known as UVB76, also known as ANVF. It's a radio broadcast that you can find at 2625 and 4810 kilohertz.
Well, like still.
Yeah, constantly. It's just that simple buzzing sound over and over and over, 24 hours a day, or so it would seem at first glance. A buzzing noise in itself wouldn't be all that interesting. There are a lot of strange sounds on the airwaves. You mentioned before there's a lot of electronic beeps and whistles, some intentional, like channel markers or mobile telephony and pager channels, some unintentional, like emissions created by faulty electrical equipment and natural sources like the aurora, even the planets of the solar system. It's not a number station or some coded message, nor does it appear to be an internally produced tone, and it's definitely not natural. On a regular basis, people listening to the buzzer hear background noises, sounds, voices, music, and this seems to indicate that whatever is producing the buzz is a physical device making an actual audible sound in an actual physical room somewhere in front of a live microphone. A microphone that's never been turned off, that's been constantly broadcasting on these two shortwave frequencies more or less uninterrupted since at least 1973. And wherever this room is, there are people living, working, doing God knows what else in the vicinity of where the equipment is set up, and we know this because sometimes we can actually hear them. In November 2001, for example, Jan Michalski, a member of the Enigma 2K group, reported the following snippet of conversation seemingly taking place not far from the microphone. It was originally in Russian, but it translates to, "I am 143, not receiving the generator, brackets, oscillator. That stuff comes from the hardware room." In a notorious example from September 2010, uploaded to YouTube by Danny198995, the following background sounds were heard. There are some low voices, but quite chillingly, there also appears to be the sound of a woman screaming.
Oh dear Lord. Yeah,
What the hell is going on there? One suggestion, and I hope this is the explanation, is that some technician is sitting with his feet up on the control panel watching a TV show. But even that, if it's true, is quite interesting and puzzling. Like, who are these people? What sort of place is this? Who is paying people to man a station whose purpose just seems to be to send out this one monotonous buzzing sound? Well, there have been occasions, rare occasions, where the buzzing has stopped and a live red voice transmission has been made. It's from these transmissions that the call signs UVB76, ANVS, MDZHB, and several others have been gleaned by lucky listeners. The following event was recorded on the 30th of July 2020. So that was some kind of coded message in Russian. Translating to the Greek alphabet, he says ANVF 77253 and then spells out the word bukvoyed, which translates literally to letter eater, but idiomatically it's the Russian equivalent of bookworm in English. It's similar to a number station transmission, but quite a bit shorter. And these voice transmissions, as we've said, are infrequent and don't adhere to any kind of recognisable timetable, which is a big departure from your average number station. Also, having this loud, distinctive channel marker draws a lot of attention to itself and to the frequency, and it seems unhelpful if you're broadcasting to people who are trying to stay low key, if you get what I mean. Russian officials have never made any comment on this signal. Rimantas Pliekis, former Minister of Communications and Informatics in Lithuania, not Russia, but nevertheless, a man with apparently some insight into these kinds of stations, wrote cryptically in his book Jamming that the voice was to confirm the readiness of the operators at the receiving stations. As far as I can tell, there's no word on what the receiving stations are supposed to be doing or why they're supposed to be listening to this station, just that someone is supposed to be listening to this at all times. The physical device producing the sound seems to have been replaced a few times over the years. In the 70s and in the 80s, the sound was supposedly more of a prolonged electronic pip, changing to a buzzing similar to what we hear today sometime around 1990.
It sounds like an electric, something that's generating a charge. Almost like a sort of Tesla coil or something like that.
Yeah. Currently, it appears to be broadcast from somewhere in the Moscow area. In recent years, and even in recent days, it has increasingly become a target for jamming and interference. This could be something along the lines of the counter-espionage jamming we discussed earlier in relation to number stations, but when you look at the details of some of the attacks, it looks like a large proportion of this activity might actually be from civilian sources. I suspect this could be the result of its increased profile thanks to various articles, videos and podcasts that have popularised the knowledge of its existence. But then again, the trollishness of some of these could easily be a cover for something more organised. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time in recent memory that government agencies have harnessed the power of the troll for political or subversive ends.
Yeah.
On August the 16th, 2020, just a couple of months ago now, music was heard being broadcast over the top of the buzzer. Unlike some of the previous events where sounds and voices were heard, this was not something in the same room as the machine, it was clearly a third party on the same frequency. The music, which included Gangnam Style, Kavinsky, and a cheery Russian track whose name translates to Despair by an artist called Enjoykin, was interspersed with electronic tones that produced line drawings in the waterfall spectrograph, which would have been seen by users listening to the station using a computer and a software-defined radio, and perhaps more to the point, would have been shown on the popular live YouTube streams people have set up that rebroadcast the transmission on YouTube. These images included Mickey Mouse, SpongeBob characters, Pokemon. Yeah. Something similar happened again on the 1st, 2nd and 3rd of September, about a month and a half ago. Strange voices, weird tones, and at one point Morse code spelling out SOS. Even some distortion to the sound of the station itself was heard. At this present moment, Michael, it seems we're in the midst of a campaign of interference against the buzzer. As cool as the idea is of a few geeks bringing down some top secret government radio system, there is just maybe some small reason to be concerned about anything that interferes with the smooth operation of this station. What is the deal with the buzzer? Why should we even care? So there's a couple of leading theories about its exact purpose. The first, and probably the most likely, is that the frequency is used for a kind of military notification network. It's just a straightforward communications channel for if the Russian army ever needs to send out a mass communication to all the commissariats and military bases and units in the field. And there's people in radio rooms all over Russia at various bases and whatnot who are tasked with sitting there listening to the buzzer, and similar stations for any communications on the network. There is actually an account attributed to one Andre RW6HRM posted on a website called pryom.org, which is dedicated to researching number stations and mystery transmissions. Although there's no verification of this, Andre claims to have been in charge of a similar station, one known to listeners as the PIP, slightly lesser known than the buzzer but following a similar format. And if his account is true, it may give probably the best insight we have into what these are and what they're for. I've edited this to just the relevant parts. I recommend checking it out for yourself if you're interested. Until 1986, there was a Kolos station on the aforementioned frequencies. Kolos was the call sign of the North Caucasus Military District's 800th notification network. It was a network of receiving devices installed in military units, military commissariats, and military factory radio rooms. Readiness checks for some services and communication centres were occasionally made by sending a message like the following: I am Kolos, only for 813, 223 and 44. How do you read me? Afterwards, the named call signs would call back and report their reception. Due to boredom and a lack of certainty about reception, one day an information service ensign suggested an enhancement to create a marker generator which would help recipients to tune to the 800th network's frequency. The enhancement suggested was approved, and the ensign was celebrated for his idea by being put into the achievement desk of the staff for glory expression. I think there's some translation weirdness there, but...
I hope not. I hope that's what it's called.
KGB Employee of the Month or something, I don't know. Before the change to a channel marker, the network transmitters were not active constantly and were switched on only for transmission checks and signal transmissions. Afterwards, the transmitters were up all the time. So, if this is true, the constant noises on these stations, the buzzer, the pip, also another one known as the squeaky wheel.
Sounds like my bike.
Crack the case. Are simply so that those military personnel tasked with listening out for rare voice messages can be sure they're dead on the right frequency at all times and don't miss any important updates. That's the sensible explanation. There's a couple of minor things that don't add up though. The idea of an ensign coming up with the idea in the 80s and being rewarded for it when a similar signal was being sent out on the buzzer frequency from the early 1970s doesn't quite add up, but generally, yeah, okay, it makes a lot of sense. The second theory is perhaps a couple of notches lower on the credibility scale, but if true, it could make the buzzer of critical importance to the lives of every human being on the planet. What I'm about to say is not necessarily mutually exclusive with the previous theory, both could be true. The theory is that the buzzer is part of a Cold War era dead hand system kept operational by the Russian government. What is a dead hand system? Well, you remember in Terminator 2 when the guy's shot and he's holding a detonator switch upside down, and the knowledge that when
Dyson.
Dyson, right? When he passes out from blood loss, he'll drop it, triggering it, so essentially his death will cause the building to explode. That's a pretty good illustration of a dead hand system. In the context of the Cold War, the dead hand systems were part of the strategy of mutually assured destruction, and would have served as like the final up years of a defeated nation. The Americans had such a system called ANDRC-8, Emergency Rocket Communication System, and the Russian system, the one that's relevant here, was referred to by codename Perimeter. The incredibly dark purpose of both systems was to ensure that in the event of a surprise nuclear attack wiping out the nation's leadership infrastructure, obliterating the chain of command that would otherwise be needed to oversee the counterattack, if the enemy won, in other words, I use that word in quotation marks, then the defeated nation would automatically unleash its ICBMs on the opponent. In other words, if Russia dies or America dies, then everyone dies. Bleak. It's pretty bleak. The current status of the American system is unknown, but by several accounts, the Soviet perimeter system remains in use by the current administration. One of the developers of Perimeter, a man named Valery Yaranich, gave an interview to Wired in 2009, in which he describes in general terms how the system determines whether or not Russia's leadership has been obliterated in a nuclear attack. Quote, "It was designed to lie semi-dormant until switched on by a high official in a crisis. Then it would begin monitoring a network of seismic, radiation and air pressure sensors for signs of nuclear explosions. Before launching any retaliatory strike, the system had to check off 4 if-then propositions. If it was turned on, then it would try to determine that a nuclear weapon had hit Soviet soil. If it seemed that one had, the system would check to see if any communications links to the war room of the Soviet General Staff remained. If they did, and if some amount of time, likely ranging from 15 minutes to an hour, passed without further indications of attack, the machine would assume officials were still living who could order the counterattack and shut down. But if the line to the General Staff went dead, then Perimeter would infer that apocalypse had arrived. It would immediately transfer launch authority to whoever was manning the system at that moment deep inside a protected bunker, bypassing layers and layers of normal command authority.
I don't know how we've not blown ourselves up yet.
Yeah.
Some of the close calls that have actually happened,
Oh,
I genuinely
yeah.
do not know how it hasn't happened. Thank God it's
That
not.
guy, I forget his name, that one Russian guy,
Who refused.
was actually ordered to launch nukes and refused.
Hero, absolute hero.
Yeah. The world's on a knife edge, man. It's scary.
If I was sitting there with the codes and it was just a case of mutual destruction, and I already knew that like my country had been wiped out with nukes, and all that was going to happen is that you were going to press this button and wipe out the other country,
Yeah.
and it would destroy all of humanity, I wouldn't press it.
No, I don't think I would either.
If something of humanity, if some people can survive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy.
Terrifying. So, the second theory about the buzzer, as discussed in the 2017 BBC article, the ghostly radio station that no one claims to run, is that this constantly open channel marked by a distinctive audio indicator serves as, or doubles as, one of the indicators Perimeter uses to determine if command communications remain in place. If the buzzer is gone from the air, then it infers that communications with military command have been knocked out and moves to the next stage in preparing a counterattack. If this is true, the buzzer isn't just some obscure oddity, it could be seen as the heartbeat of the world as we know it. Although I'm not completely sold on the truth of this, I mean the Perimeter system is real, but whether or not the buzzer is part of it. But since I read about the idea, you'll forgive me if I'm a wee bit less excited about the idea of pranksters messing around with it.
Yeah.
I think we'll leave you to ruminate on the idea of some dank meme lords bringing about Armageddon by blasting pictures of SpongeBob across the airwaves. What's your thoughts, Michael?
It's probably how it'll happen. No, yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I do find the idea of strange signals that you can't quite get a grasp of and that you don't 100% know the origin of them. It does ignite the imagination. And like I say, I didn't find numbers, but I certainly, on a number of occasions when I was younger, detuned radios and sort of listened to what was in between. And as you know, there's been a long gestating episode of Talking Till Dawn that's about alleged communication with the dead, and some people talk about detuned radio signals and things like that. So it's fascinating. It's kind of terrifying as well to not really... I know you're saying that, like, with the number stations, that, okay, they're definitely... or it is most likely that they're used in espionage, which would seem to make sense. But you just wonder if there's other purposes to some of them and people just never figure that out. And that's the whole thing. A broadcast is meant to be received, and I think that's the most frightening thing about them.
Who is it for? Yeah. What I didn't really mention actually in relation to number stations is that arguably they are increasingly moving online. I haven't researched this side of it quite as much, but there's the darknet, of course, and there's a lot of weird stuff on YouTube, things like videos of weird flashing shapes and flickering lights and things that look machine generated by machines and intended to be consumed by machines. And you hear people joking around like, oh, it's Skynet making videos for other machines, but I think it's very likely that, you know, if you're caught with a shortwave radio these days, that almost is a little bit suspicious, because who the hell listens to shortwave radio now except spies, you know? And probably the people who are interested in spies. But everyone has a computer, so it's almost surprising that number stations still exist, and it's not at all surprising that some of these weird machine-generated YouTube channels, which may well be the next generation of this, and because of the democratization that computers and the internet offers, I think it's very likely that some of those stations, or most of those stations, are by other groups, not necessarily nation states, criminals, all kinds of things.
It's fascinating though, and I know I tend to veer towards the more anomalous, but you know, there is something about radio signals. So we've talked before about how it'd be good to do a Lost Cosmonauts episode, but there's something about radio waves in general that sometimes there's the feeling with, and certainly there are claims that radio waves have certain properties that we're not quite aware of yet. And I'm not going down the 5G conspiracy routes, everyone, just before if my imagination really runs rampant, it's the idea of these disembodied voices speaking from the dark. It kind of reminded me, there's a Lovecraft novella, The Whisper in the Dark.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminded me of that story as well, when you...
The little tinny voice of the...
Yeah, 100%. That synthetic voice that is kind of speaking and not quite human. And
again, remember that these have been around for over 100 years now.
Yeah.
Is it possible Lovecraft stumbled on one of these, an early number station? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I doubt maybe they wouldn't have had voice synthesis and stuff back then, but the history of it, the deep history of it, is not well recorded. We know that they were around in the First World War, and then we know increasing amounts as you get through the mid-20th century up to the 70s, 80s and 90s, but there's not a lot of recorded stuff from before the 70s, really.
Yeah, but I would imagine even in the early days, even if you're talking about 100 years ago, technologically, as long as you can record the human voice, there may have been some elaborate use of like wax tube recordings or...
Steampunk number station.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also the broadcast signal intrusion thing I find really interesting, because it's, especially before the internet, you think of TV as this sort of monolithic thing. It gives you the truth. It's very much one way.
Yeah. You
sit and consume it, and for someone to reach out and interfere with it goes against everything that you know about television and broadcast. It's it's hard to explain, but in the 70s and 60s and 70s, when the first ones took place, it must have really been a bit of a mindfuck for people, especially that alien voice.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think some people genuinely did think that was...
That was it. Here they are. They've arrived.
Yeah.
They're here already, man.
They're here. They're laughing at that.
These days, Martin, I'm only half joking about that. But yeah, like, I mean, there's a kind of inversion of that. The decoding of transmissions is quite interesting as well. You would never think wrestling and NASA would go together, but there are people who were able to tap in to broadcasts from some sort of satellite network. And in wrestling, for example, you know, you would get the broadcast trucks.
Yeah.
For some reason, they were like filming, I think it was like rehearsals.
Right.
Or sometimes it would be like they would have two versions of the one match.
Yeah.
They'd have like a recorded one and a live one. But anyway, some people were able to actually get their hands on the stuff that wasn't meant to be broadcast or was only broadcast once.
Right.
With regards to NASA, there's the people who obviously claim that they've intercepted NASA transmissions.
Yeah.
Between the astronauts, you know, and obviously that's highly contentious. But no, it's a fascinating topic.
I just wanted to mention before we go, we get so many lovely messages from people from time to time. We like to give a little shout out to some of the folk that have reached out to us. Did you say that you'd had some nice emails and stuff recently, Mike?
Yeah, we have. So if you want to contact us, you can get in touch with us at talkingtilldawn@gmail.com.
Twitter as well.
And Twitter as well, yeah. We've received a few. Robert, Diane, Pat, Kamika, Ashley. Sorry, no, not Ashley. Jeff.
Oh yeah, easy mistake to make.
Yeah, we've had some lovely messages.
Just want to give a quick shout out as well to some of the folks who've said hello or said nice things about us over on Twitter recently. Kim, Christina, Bridget, thanks a lot for all your support. Also cheers to Steve, D-Vixen and Marty, who I think originally brought up number stations and whatnot as an idea for an episode over on the Ghastly Tales Discord. We always want to hear you guys' ideas for future episodes. Let us know what you'd like to hear about.
And we even got, when we were talking about band names, We even got our first piece of sort of fan art from Kamika, who sent an album cover for Mane of Serpents, which I
Loved
think...
it.
Yeah, it looked great. But yeah, so it's great that we're hearing from people and we're getting that sort of interaction. And on YouTube as well, we get loads of comments on all the YouTube videos. Thank you very, very much.
Awesome. Well, I think, Michael, that is the sun
It
coming
bloody is.
It's actually streaming in through the window into my eyes right now. I'm not used to talking for this length of time anymore.
I know. Do you not find that when you haven't done something like this for a while that your voice... I recorded a vlog for the Ghastly Tales YouTube channel earlier on, and I felt that my voice has been hoarse since it, and it was only like 20 minutes long.
My brain feels hoarse.
Yeah, I am a horse.
And on that note,
anyway, yes,
we're going to mosey off into the sunset, sunrise, whatever.
Beautiful. Take care, everyone.